Welcome to the Concordia Publishing House Podcast, where we consider everything in the light of Jesus Christ, who is the same yesterday, today, and forever. I'm your host, Elizabeth Pittman. Can ordinary lives be extraordinary? Our guest today, Martha Van Buskirk, says yes. In our conversation, she shares how you, yes, you, can make a difference in your very own family, neighborhood, and community through often small but spirit-led acts. Martha is a writer, speaker, and the author of Ordinary Lives, Extraordinary Grace, God's Purpose in Your Everyday. Before we start our chat with Martha, I'd like to thank our friends at the LCMS Foundation for their support of the podcast. How can your congregation turn significant financial gifts into a long-term funding source that blesses your church for generations to come? The LCMS Foundation was created to provide professional investment services to LCMS churches, schools, and RSOs. They've helped hundreds of congregations create, manage, and grow endowments using investments tailored to the unique goals and needs of each congregation. And now they'd like to help yours. Learn more at lcmsfoundation.org/podcast. I'd also like to thank our friends at the Concordia University, Wisconsin School of Continuing Education. No matter where you are in life, CUW's online continuing ed classes fit your schedule and connect you with a supportive community. CUW offers flexible opportunities to deepen your Bible knowledge, explore church history, and enhance your ministry skills. Invest in your personal and spiritual growth by visiting cuw.edu/continuinged to view the full course list and sign up today. Now on to our conversation with Martha Van Buskirk. Martha, it's good to have you on the podcast.
Wonderful. Well, I'm honored to be here, Elizabeth. Can't wait to talk with you.
Well, it's neat to have you back. First time on the podcast, but back as a CPH author. It's been some time since you and your husband released your first book. Before we get into the heart of what you share in Ordinary Lives, Extraordinary Grace, tell our listeners a little bit about you. Like if they go to your website, they're going to find that you're a self-described, cause-driven writer, learn a few things about you. Just give our listeners an overview of who you are.
All right. Glad to do that. So, I don't know. I live in Houston. I have 3 amazing millennial adult children. I'm married to a second career pastor. And let's see, I'm a writer. I write for a living in addition, to this book. And we serve at a beautiful mission start in downtown Houston. Yeah.
So Houston is big. So when you say downtown, you mean like truly downtown?
Truly downtown. Like when you come out of our church, it was a 1937 mission plant for Spanish-speaking people, and it's just a beautiful place. You are looking at downtown, the whole, skyline. It's a great place.
So now that we're here and we're just about to release your new book, Ordinary Lives, Extraordinary Grace, God's Purpose in Your Everyday. In the introduction to the book, you shared that the time of the pandemic kind of got you thinking about purpose and place. Tell us a little bit about how that affected you. And then do you also think that there were a lot of other people who may have been in that same boat?
Oh, absolutely. I think I remember hearing someone say like COVID was something we all had in common, right? It was like the first time that everyone, had this sort of experience. At the beginning of COVID, when everything shut down, we had a lot of time. We were home. We had a lot of time. And I was just sitting there thinking, and I said, you know what? I've always wanted to write a book and of my own. And I don't want to be in my wheelchair, in the nursing home years from now and think like I never really tried. So I really prayed about it and began the journey, I guess you could say. And today, looking back, I can just see my sweet Lord, and He led me to this book, which led me to a coaching program, which led me to a mentor, which led me to a writing group, which led me to Concordia Publishing House. I mean, it's like a beautiful story. So I had to do something uncomfortable for me. I had to step out. I would have been perfectly happy being cozy at home with my mom, who's 91, who lives with us, and my sweet husband. But I just felt like, you know what, a lot of things are happening, and I want to be a force for good, led by the Lord. So that happened. And the other thing that happened was that there seemed to be sort of a loss of civility, and I don't know if we've even really truly recovered from that. And then lastly, I would say I was working on in that journey space, I was working on a different writing project. Okay. And the Lord just kind of came to me, was like, this is what you need to write about. It was different. And he really led me through the word and through prayer and meditation, this whole idea of like shining your light, this little gospel light of mine, like everywhere you go. And he began teaching me, like, Martha, you have to get out. You're an introvert. You just can't sit there and read your books and write. And you need to, there are a lot of people who are hurting, and the world needs each one of us. And so, really, the Lord was teaching me. This book was to help me, honestly. And so I started doing that. And then it was just amazing, the kinds of things that happen.
Well, as you started going down that path, and I think you're right, you mentioned the loss of civility, and I think I, I'm afraid that genie might be out of the bottle, but if anything can combat that, it's those of us who are Christian actually taking the intentional steps to look around and look for those little ways that we can make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
How have you seen, as you started studying this, or experienced or witnessed actions of other people taking seemingly insignificant steps or actions that actually turned out to be quite extraordinary?
Well, I will see, once I started paying attention to it, I noticed even at the beginning with the little things, like when I do a lot, I walk a lot. And when someone comes through the neighborhood and gives me a big enthusiastic wave, oh my gosh, I like feel good, right? So we minimize the importance of things like that. Or if I meet someone new and I invite them to coffee, I mean, we think like that's not, important. Um, the people, even like the people around us in our home, I started seeing like, I can really be nicer to the people in my home.
I think we all could. We all have our
Well,
moments.
the funny thing is, people who have read, been early readers are like, that one kind of hit me a little bit. And I think we think like, oh, hey, we're nice people. But I think that and again, what has to happen, I believe, is that once we're filled with the Spirit teaches us. We in our own selves, our own sinful selves, can think like, we're good, right? Or whatever. But it's being filled with the Holy Spirit that gives us the juice, as you will, to not only to anchor us, but to power us and then lead us into those journeys. And I have found, it's just so amazing. One time my mom and I went to vote. And so this was maybe when COVID was just leaving us, right? So people, it was still a little bit, and we just went into the polling place. We just said hi to the people. Now, my mom is really nice, I have to say that. Anyway, by the time we left, we were like hugging each other. I mean, they were just like, you came in and you were nice. And I was like, how could that be unusual? And they were like, it's unusual. Anyway, so that's like an isolated incident in a way. But I feel like when we see people and then we notice them and we look at them with new eyes and new ears and we ask them how they're doing, and we don't have a motivation of our own. It's not about us. Usually there's no money involved, and it's in safe places with safe people that we know are safe. Look, it's a lot of good can happen. One instance, it's in the book, and I'm going to say, I don't want to spoil it for the readers, but there's someone that my mother noticed who works for us every week, and who mows our lawn. And she noticed that he wasn't there. And then we found out that he was having some health problems. Well, fast forward, I think my husband actually saved his life. So you can read that in the book. And it's just, but I do want to say, though, that all the things aren't going to be like that. That was pretty dramatic. But that did start with just noticing the people who were in our lives and who were so kind to us. And then just saying, like, hi, how you doing? Nothing that anyone can do that.
Two things have stood out to me as you've been talking. One is that we need to pay attention, which
Mhm.
requires us to stop looking inward at everything and how it's affecting us and look outward at what is being placed in front of us. But another piece that I think is extremely important is that you mentioned being anchored, and we need to be spiritually anchored. Talk about that a little bit and why it's important, and what are some steps that we can do to make sure that we are spiritually anchored.
Super. This is in the book, and I know we all have, I think we all develop our own unique way of doing it. So I think we have to be spiritually filled with the light of Christ to spiritually shine with the light of Christ. To me, that's like, okay, that's kind of how it works, right? So what does that mean? It means that as we are able, and I know there are a lot of, busy mamas with littles or high schoolers or people with busy jobs. I think there's an intentionality that we can cultivate in whatever time we have to read the word, to pray, to meditate, to find a great devotional. um, Even when I was working at an office job, I would just get there and I would just spend the first 10 minutes just doing my whatever it is. I mean, just take that first step. I think sometimes we don't do something because it's just too big of a step. But I think we've learned that small things, one at a time, that can fill us up. And then we can see more because remember, it's not Martha doing the work, it's the Holy Spirit doing the work. And the glory is not for Martha, the glory is for God. So it's just like a whole little, thing there. And um, it is really amazing when you get those nudges and and even sometimes you just are just being nice where you're checking out at a store. I was checking out at a store where I go to frequently, and I developed a friendship with someone who worked there, and we prayed for them, prayed for their family, and um, it was lovely.
How do you, so you mentioned like in the mornings, at the office job, how do you today like make sure that you're reserving that time? Because that can be really hard, whether we're at home, whether we're working. Even if we get in a good routine, all of a sudden you can look up and realize I've been off my routine for 2 weeks and now I've got to figure out how to get it back. So how do you approach making sure you're intentionally reserving that time?
Well, I would say be tender with yourself. I mean, we're all doing the best we can, scrambling here, scrambling there. So I just, what I mean? I don't want to give someone uh, this is, I want to
Thou
give.
shalt.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, thank you for perfect. So I would just encourage people to just take that next step. I think what works for me, and of course it's all what works for you. I find I have to do it first thing in the morning when I get up. So I'm a Martha, I really am. So it took me a while to kind of, I don't say that maybe the spirit trained me in this way because I was like, I got to get to work, got to get started on my list. No, no, you know, um, just saying, okay, after I get up and I get ready, I take my coffee, I have my quiet time. That's my quiet time, my devotional time. Yes, I read some at night, certainly pray during the day, but mainly that's my I like that because it's the least likely thing to be interfered with as the day goes on. But I know other people who may like listen to something on their earbuds or whatever, or they during lunch or when the baby's taking a nap or in the evenings. I think each person has to craft that. But I'm really glad you brought this up because the spiritual feeling, I think, is really foundational to shining. I think it really is something that we have to do in addition to, our other, spiritual activities.
Well, and we've heard the phrase, I think often in terms of nutrition, like garbage in, garbage out. And that goes for what we're putting into our minds and our ears and what we're consuming. And the more we can be filled with the word and with that type of study, that's going to help us as we go out
Mhm.
in our daily lives. What would you say? Because we all have our moments of struggle, right? Life is not always easy. We're going to run into obstacles and frustrations, and we're going to feel really down. What advice would you have for someone who is in that struggle um, situation, and as far as how that struggle situation can help them find a way to shine the light, but also how can you help not lose the light, not lose the opportunity to remember where you're anchored in those times?
Thank you. Well, I think again, it's that time in this, that spiritual time gives us the gives the spirit, a place in our hearts, and then that guides us, right? And I think I don't know about you, but I was pretty discouraged during COVID, and it can be very discouraging now when we look at the world, and I think we all think things like, oh my gosh, the world's a hot mess. I can't do anything, right? I can't fix it. And I think that we feel very powerless and like I said, discouraged. So when you develop these new eyes and ears and you start looking, and this is just in your everyday, ordinary past, I am just an ordinary person walking around, how we're kind, how we talk to people. I think you begin to see, oh yeah, that made a difference. I mean, not in every situation. We're going to miss things. We're going to fail. We're all sinners saved by grace, doing the best we can, right? But I think you start to see it happen. I think you start to see, and then you start to notice when people are kind to you and people do things for you. You think, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. Somebody did something kind for me. I mean, you start to notice the economy of it, and it's such a wonderful thing to just say, like, God, thank you. I mean, that was so amazing. I mean, it's such a nice equation of filling, shining, or receiving, praising, repeat. Just kidding.
Well, it's you mentioned that there were years ago. I was in the midst of um, a long hospital stay. It was an
Mm.
intense health situation at the time, and I remember out of the blue, I'm in the hospital, and Darren brought in. He said, "You got a package." Brought it in, and it was a hand knit Afghan from a college friend who I hadn't talked
Aw.
to in quite some time.
Mhm.
But it was one of those things where it was like, oh, somebody paid attention, and I'm just like wow, And I still that we still have the blanket. I still think about. I can't look at it without
Mm.
thinking about that moment. So those
Mhm.
little things, there are little rays of light that can pop up as we go through hard times.
Absolutely. And I think, I don't know how to say this, but I think people know when we're paying attention. And I think they know when we're being kind and we don't have some secret agenda, or we're not trying to just puff ourselves up, maybe because we listen more or we ask open ended questions or whatever, or we're not expecting them to do anything. Um, and like someone saw that you were there and they did something. Hospitals are notoriously freezing cold, right? And made something for you. I mean, or gave you this beautiful gift. And I think I can think back to when we first moved to Texas 20 years ago, and there were two people who stand out to me in my mind, who, was a small town where kind of everybody knew everybody, and we're best friends, from high school, that hung around with those people, where their families were there. So it wasn't a lot of space for new friends. And two people really kind of reached out to me. I will always remember them. That was so significant to me. I was such, an outsider. And I think there are a lot of outsiders out there, right? And I think they're in our families and they're in our churches. And, the holidays is like a perfect time for us to look with fresh eyes for that, nephew that we see, or listen to Granny's story for the 15th time or 50th time, or and give respect to those elders, right? I see it a lot. Well, even the other day I was at the grocery store and I saw this woman coming out with it. And I mean, she's probably 80, and her cart was like, I don't know, it was filled to the brim. And I just went up to her and said, "Hey, can I help you load that in your cart?" Now, she did take a chance on me, right? But she said, "Oh my gosh, that would be so awesome." So we went over to her car and I put the stuff in her car, and then we were just talking. Well, it ends up she goes to my mom's church. But, you know, um, she's like, "Oh, I'm so glad you helped me." It was just, I like noticed it was safe. You know what I mean? I thought, yeah, I could do that. I could take a minute. It's really, I think, time and availability often, but it's just small things like that.
So for many of us and many of our listeners, one of the areas where we serve and we kind of know we're doing it is in the local congregation. It's more of it's I almost want to say it's more formal. We may have formal official volunteer jobs or whatnot. When it comes to how we are helping in our local congregation, why should we keep kindness at the center? And frankly, kindness should be kept at the center of all of our interactions. But why is that is especially important when we're interacting with people in our local congregation through whatever ways we may be involved?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a funny thing, but sometimes Christians get a bad rap for being unkind. I mean, which is kind of ironic, really, when you think about the way Jesus just kind of moved in his path and talked to all these unimportant people and healed them and loved them and forgave them. I mean, the story seems slightly inconsistent, right? I think in our churches, well, hey, my dad was a pastor. I can remember being in elementary school and looking at someone in my church and thinking, he doesn't like my daddy.
Oh,
I
familiar with that feeling.
yeah, I thought, oh my gosh, what a terrible thing for a little kid to see in a way. Um, and then now that my husband became a pastor, 20 years ago, I think we learn that we're all in this priesthood of believers. We're sinners and saints. People make, we're all imperfect, and it's not about us. It's about the pastor has to think about the congregation. And as we move in those circles within our church, yes, we can be kind and forgiving, and um, we can be open to the wishes and the what other people want to do. It just can't all be about us. I think sometimes that happens, um, and that is a perfect and wonderful place for us to shine the light of Jesus to other people. I mean, when you look in those back rows, you see that elderly lady who comes and sits and nobody ever talks to her, or the teen that kind of kind of gruffly comes in, or there are people there who have gotten there, thank the Lord, right? And that we can just say, "Hey, how you doing?" And just we don't have to do that much, but just I think the kindness, and then just being open to serving or being in relationship with someone at the church that just is more reflective, I guess, of our faith. I think.
Where there's much more that we could probably unpack in terms of the area of service and ministry, but we're going to do a Facebook Live before too long, and we'll cover it there.
Okay.
What advice? So, hindsight is 2020. So, sitting here today in 2024, what would you have wanted younger Martha to have had? Like, if she could have had this book 20 years ago, what message do you think would resonate the most?
Well, that's a really fascinating question, because it's almost like the whole thing that actually happened. Because I was in DC politics, in my younger life, and I learned there it's all about status and being with the important people and connecting with the movers and shakers in the room, and you don't really pay attention to the ordinary people, and it's all about you. I mean, pretty much. And I would say, and then I wanted to be one of those people. Okay. So now I'm so interested in the outsider and somebody, the people who are sitting by themselves. I'm drawn to them. So I would still tell younger Martha, listen, save the pain of that journey and the learning, and just to know that in God's economy, these small conversations are important. And we don't have to be a political figure or an influencer or some sort of famous person to do really important things. And then when you spend 10 minutes talking to grandma on the phone or singing her a song, or you read a story to a child, or whatever it is that you're doing, those are important in God's economy. And rejoice in those and celebrate those. Those are the things as we walk in our vocations and where we are, that where God's placed us, where He's experienced us. You know, He's got amazing plans, and we need to remember what's important to Him, not what's important to our earthly world. And I think that's what I would tell her. And that extraordinary grace of the Lord, when we walk that out through faith, we can do wonderful things with our ordinary lives.
Without a doubt. What would you say to someone? So, if someone has tried to help and they've tried to be kind and taken a small step and has just been burned, say, the woman at the groceries reacted badly, and instead of it turning into a positive conversation, but for someone who's been really burned by trying to help, what advice would you have for them, and burned to the point of maybe not wanting to put themselves out there again?
Yes, and that certainly happens. Like, you go to help someone, like, you say, "Can I help you with that?" And they say, "No, I'm good." I think we have to be willing for people to say, "I'm good," whatever. The other thing I think is really in the approach is, these are small things. These are really small things, and they're usually, you know, individualized things. So if you see someone and you just start talking to them, you're asking them questions. Maybe and I've certainly done this many times, maybe we push our button on transmit or judgment or whatever, and we alienate others. And sometimes, we need a counselor to help us with a relationship that's been broken, or with someone that we've tried to help in our family or otherwise. So sometimes there's like a deeper course at play. But generally speaking, I guess I would say just take those first steps with people in a relationship. Sometimes that means saying, "I'm sorry." I mean, I've gone to people and just said, "You know what? I really messed up with something, and I really want you to forgive me." I've had to look at my own life and say, "Okay, Martha, that relationship, that little thing that didn't go so well, that's on you, and you need to try to make it better." So I would say a light touch filled with the Spirit, and then we just, pray for God to show us the way. And, sometimes that means we pray. We can always pray for that person. Sometimes that means asking them for forgiveness. Sometimes that means, okay, we talk to someone and get some help how to work with them. Or sometimes we just say, "Okay, you're good. Well, listen, I don't know, you say something to them that's encouraging,"
Hmm.
which is also sometimes hard to find just the right words. But you just say, "Okay, I'm thinking about you." Something like that.
It can be hard to be brave and take that step, but often it will pay off if we can get outside of our heads.
Yes.
So we're here entering a busy time of the year where there are a lot of not only gatherings of friends and at church and at office events, but also families come together a lot as we come into the holiday season, extended family and nuclear family. And it can be real easy. And I think when we're with our immediate family, it can be really easy to put our guard down and just snap at somebody. It's I always take it when my kids do that. It's like, well, they're safe here. So this is a chance where they can get that out. They'll be corrected later, but it gives them a chance to get that energy out. How can we like be intentional when we're with our families this year, through these holiday events, with making sure that we are caring for them and helping shine a light into the events of the day that we may be experiencing?
Well, I think things just do happen because we're tired. We've incorporated a whole nother level of activities into our schedule. There are gifts to buy and cookies to make. So I think there's just an added level of stress and excitement that sometimes bring on those kinds of things. Um, what I do personally, I think, is I've kind of lowered the amount of stuff that I do. So I'm just speaking for myself. Then I don't get as tired and cranky if I don't do, and I know some people say, well, look, I have to do this and I have to do that. I hear you. Sometimes you just have to do it. I think the other thing is when we ask questions, I've noticed in family gatherings and things, when we ask questions and we don't just throw out inflammatory statements or I don't know, say things that are, you can tell they're meant to hurt someone,
Mm,
right? And I mean, and I've done it. So I mean, I'm not saying that I haven't, but I mean, when we just or we do things that bring and foster, a common bond or collegiality or whatever. Maybe we're going to build a Lego thing together, or we're going to bake together. You know, doing activities and then including people who are a little bit outside or who we're going to go babysit next week. My mom's coming with us. I thought she would say no. She said yes for a little grandchild. So just including people and just having again like those fresh eyes and ears to kind of reflect that unconditional love of Christ and just that that God loves them. I mean, you know what? And we can communicate that as best we can, um, with our actions and what we say and do.
it's really easy. It's easy to pop off with something meant to hurt because we know how to push the buttons of our siblings
Sure, we
and of our
do.
parents. And so I think it's for us to take that half a beat before we let the words fly to go. Is this really going to help the relationship and help the mood of the day? I think is really important.
Yeah,
And
and
we'll have a lot. Go ahead.
we all, and I mean, when we all have those things, I mean, it's such a relatable question, and it's something that we all struggle with. And the other thing I would say is I'm trying to look to myself first, say like, what am I bringing to this party? I mean, how am I contributing to that? Because I have to really start with myself. I mean, it's not always the other person's fault, right?
Right. requires a little
Unfortunately,
requires a little humility on our parts, which can be hard to face, but we
right?
need to do it. And at each chapter of the book, you end with some points to ponder and then an action challenge. So I thought as we were wrapping up today that I would let you leave our listeners with an action challenge on how
Ooh.
they can help either to find their purpose in their everyday. So I'll turn it over to you to leave our listeners with something to think about as they go into their day.
I think I would probably take one from the first chapter because I think when it's sort of a foundational thing. So in this chapter, we're talking about how we're unique creations and how God made this amazing world, but every single person is unique, and many aspects of us are unique. So uh, just to rejoice that He said, "Okay, God made Elizabeth and God made Martha, and we're unique human beings." So He has something special for us to do. So in this one, it just says the action shot, just like thank God for creating you, and also for His creation. What do you love about it? Contemplate how are uniquely created and placed. We look again like, okay, I'm here. I never expected to be in Texas, but here I am, right? Like, what is there? What's around you? And then meditate on the enormity of our world, and also on God's specific love and attention for you as an individual. I think if we look at our lives, we can all go back and see, like, I can see that God was taking care of me, even though I didn't realize it. And I think when we understand this idea of, like God created us to walk on these actions, to be led by His grace, to do things for His purposes, I think it resets us in a healthy way. And so that's what I would leave you with.
You heard it, listeners. There's your action challenge for the coming days.
Woo-hoo.
Martha, it was great to have you with us today. For our listeners and our viewers, we will link to the new book, Ordinary Lives, Extraordinary Grace, God's Purpose in Your Everyday, in the show notes. We'll also link to Martha's website so you can learn more about Martha and her work. So I encourage you to take a look, check it out. Martha, thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you so much, Concordia Publishing House. Just truly an honor to work with you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Listeners, we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Concordia Publishing House Podcast. I pray that this time was valuable to your walk with Christ. We'd love to connect with listeners on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Concordia Pub. Visit cph.org for more resources to grow deeper in the gospel.